Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may be, and welcome to TestFlix 2020. This is example mapping. So I'm your host. My name is Thomas Haver. I've been in IT for close to a decade, and before that, I was a research scientist. I'm also a big evangelist for Ruby Cucumber, and I have a very lovely cartoon family, as you see here. If you're interested in learning more about automation or DevOps, I highly recommend going to my team's blog, Red Green Refactor, or reaching out to me on Twitter at CogsFun. Let's dive in. So example mapping is a technique that we're going to use to refine requirements and generate executable specifications, which act as our tests. Let's start at the beginning, though. There's a convention that we typically follow with user stories, originally credited to Rachel Davies, that follows: as a type of user, I want some particular feature so that some benefit is received. As an example, as a bank customer, I want to view my current account balance so that I know my recent deposit went through. While this technique is useful, even Jeff Patton, who's made it very popular in his user story mapping techniques, has said that it's oftentimes restrictive because it doesn't necessarily describe technology updates or UI changes very well. So we want to be more flexible and integrate testing as part of this upfront concern for refining our requirements. To do so, we follow the 3 C's rules. So before any sort of development starts, we want to have a conversation to clarify and confirm. The C stands for card, as in user stories are written on cards. They don't have to contain all the information. They just have to have enough to identify the requirement. It represents the requirement. It doesn't include everything that's needed. It is a promise to have a conversation. That conversation is the exchange of ideas and opinions between members of the team. It will take place over time during estimation and planning session before actual implementation. This is done often verbally, and in our today's world will occur oftentimes online through Zoom meetings and such. So we want to make sure that we generate executable specifications as a result of this conversation so that we may have a confirmation, otherwise known as an acceptance test. For a lot of complex stories, we want to use those examples of the actual implementation of that business logic in the form of these executable specifications, so that way we can actually confirm we delivered what we set out to do. So this is often a big challenge. You have not everyone on the team involved with requirements writing at the outset, but you need to have testers involved early on. Therefore, we have a structured conversation that is example mapping. In this structured conversation, it's often led by, say, the product owner or a lead business analyst to have a collaborative discussion where all participants will participate actively. You have diverse perspectives, so all primary areas of a team are represented. It should be short, time boxed for, say, 30 minutes or less, with a progressive focus where you capture the information live. And at the end of it, you have a thumbs up or thumbs down vote. There are a lot of common refinement activities known as Three Amigos or specification workshops or discovery workshops. Whatever you use, it's important they must be done regularly. So let's look at the example mapping itself. It is part of the discovery phase of behavior-driven development, which contains discovery, formulation, and automation as a process to identify your requirements, formulate them as executable specifications, and lastly, automate them. So the example mapping itself focuses on a single user story written on a yellow card at the top of the map. Underneath it, you will have blue business rules. For each rule, you will have one or more examples on those green cards, as well as questions that the group will identify. To be more exact, you focus on a single story in an example mapping session that is time boxed for, say, 30 minutes or less. All of your acceptance criteria, your business logic, are written on those blue business cards. Your examples are written on green cards underneath. They are not your full test cases. They are the scenario names, the foundation of your testing. And any questions that no one in the workshop can answer are written down on those red cards. The time box is important, and at the end, you'll have that consensus point of thumbs up, thumbs down by members of the team to agree whether work is ready to begin or you need additional detail before the story is ready to go. You have additional benefits to example mapping. One of those being, if you see way too many red cards on that example map, that's a good indication development work is not ready to begin. If you have too many blue business rules, that is an indication that that story is too large and it needs to be split into 2 or more stories, continuing the example mapping session, focusing on one story. If you have way too many green examples underneath a single business rule, that is an indication that rule is too dense. And you need to focus your efforts on splitting that rule into 2 or more and continuing your workshop. There's a lot of benefits to example mapping. For one, it creates a shared understanding amongst all members of the team. Your examples automatically become your user stories, which can be turned into those automated scenarios. Your rules become acceptance criteria, your so-called business logic, which are good targets for unit and integration tests. And it also reduces the rework of large or unclear stories by allowing you to split them apart and reject work that is not ready to enter the team space. So let's go through an example map, shall we, to get meta for holding a virtual webinar, to get extra meta. So some rules we may come up with is the presentation must be stored in an accessible location. The speaker must have a machine capable of audio visual, and the webinar must have a means to record the presentation. With some examples we come up with that say SlideShare is valid and YouTube is valid for storing the presentation. By the way, you can actually find this presentation stored on SlideShare at the last slide of this. Also, we look at machines to record it. Lenovo ThinkPad has a built-in speaker microphone, so does a MacBook Pro. And for recording, you can use GoToMeeting, but not Confide. So it's completely fine to use positive and negative scenarios. In fact, you should include both as examples illustrating your rules. And you can come up with a series of questions that people may not know the answer to about will it be edited afterwards? Will it only be available to registered attendees? These are the things that we need to know the answers to. And you would follow up outside of that example mapping session. So a word of caution though, if you're going to look to adopt it. Fully writing out those test cases during a session while others sit idly by is not advisable. They're just the starting point, the names you're using. It's also important to not fall into the trap that the examples are the only testing you need. You need to go farther than that. Again, it's the foundation that covers your business logic, not the full testing scope. And teams are going to be resistant to change. Even if example mapping is an improvement, it's hard to break that habit. So examples themselves will take various forms. They don't just simply have to be a name. They could be input, output, data pairs, sketches of the user interface, a bulleted list, Excel workbook, whatever you want. The important point of those examples, it is a context, action, and outcome, the user behavior we're trying to identify. And there are multiple tools available for use like SpecFlow or Cucumber that will help you format those executable specifications into automated tests. So it's a great way to easily adopt this and put example mapping to good use as executable specifications as automated scenarios. So in summary, we are going to use our examples, our test cases, to illustrate our business rules of those user stories. Our test cases become living documentation, become acceptance criteria. Thank you very much for your time. You can contact me on LinkedIn, and a link to my presentation is on SlideShare here. Take care, everyone.